welcome to everyone and thanks for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have Robert Watson from Sparke Helmore Lawyers presenting on this interesting topic. Robert is a partner at Sparke Helmore who specialises in procurement, probity and AI risk management. He's here today to talk to us about managing the risks of AI. As you're no doubt aware, AI is penetrating products, services and infrastructure, and the risks of using AI are starting to become well known. These include cyber attacks, breach of privacy, data security, breach of law and discrimination, just to name a few. What's less clear is whether universities and other members are taking appropriate steps to manage these risks. As AI permeates almost everything, members are likely to be purchasing products and services that contain AI without necessarily being aware of it and managing the risk. And contractors are increasingly using AI, again, without members necessarily being aware of it and managing the risks. This is becoming increasingly important to manage from a risk perspective and an insurance perspective. Robert will talk to us today about the national response to AI and the actions that members can take to identify and protect themselves from these risks. So please join me in welcoming Robert Watson. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. So I'll just start with an acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Sparke Helmore acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. So again, thank you. So yes, I'm very thrilled and excited and privileged to have the opportunity to talk to you about AI. And I've got there on the screen there a summary of our agenda today. So really what I want to do is just talk about the AI revolution and then some of the common misconceptions associated with that. I want to spend a few moments just talking about the risks and harms of AI, which gives a bit of context to why we're all here today, and then go through the national response to AI. There's a whole raft of policy that's out there at the moment that you need to be aware of, and within that is, and central to that, Australia's AI ethics principles, the national framework, the voluntary AI safety standard, which provides guidance to procurement processes, the proposed mandatory guardrails, and then the policy for responsible use in government, which is a Commonwealth Government document, which we'll talk about. I'm going to briefly then touch upon the global response, just to make you realise it's not just us that has to deal with this. And then I want to try and bring this down to sort of to home, to reality of what we need to do. So how do we respond? Looking at procurement process changes we need to make. I'll look at some AI drafting examples. I'll try and give you as much meat on the bones of what we need to do as possible. And then we'll look at some of the key takeaways and have a open question and answer session. But I thought to start today, it would be interesting just to look at a quote. So this is a statement made by President Joe Biden at his final address to the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September last year. So it's quite amazing that he chose to talk about AI in the middle of his speech, but it's actually really interesting to see what he said. So just going through it, artificial intelligence is going to change our ways of life, our ways of work, and our ways of war. It could usher in scientific progress at a pace never seen before, and much of it could make our lives better. But AI also brings profound risks, from deep fakes to disinformation, to novel pathogens, to bioweapons. But let us be honest, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we need to do to manage this technology. Nothing is certain about how AI will evolve or how it will be deployed. No one knows all of the answers. In the years ahead, there may well be no greater test of our leadership than how we deal with AI. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that at the highest levels of government, there's an awareness of the enormous challenge that we face with AI, and all of us really need to start actively doing this now. AI fundamentally changes the risk paradigm in what we do, and we need to manage that. So I wanted to also just start with some common misconceptions, and these are, I've been talking to multiple organisations government and private sector about AI. And it's interesting how there are a number of quite significant misconceptions about what we need to do. So misconception number one, this is for any member going out to market to buy stuff. And that is that we're not going to the market for AI, so there's no issue. I guess what we have to all realize is that it's like saying I'm not going to market for IT unless I specify. Well, AI is basically in everything. And it's going to increasingly be part of a tendered solution to what you're seeking to buy, whether you've asked for it or not. So simply just saying you're not going to market for AI doesn't mean that you're not buying AI. And you need to build into your tender processes the possibility that AI will be included in what is bid back. So just because you're not going out to buy an AI data center or an AI piece of AI doesn't mean you're not actually procuring it and buying it. And what you actually need to do is assume that basically everything will have AI in it, not the other way around. So as I sort of semi-jokingly say to clients, unless you're going to buy tables and chairs, just assume it's in there. So misconception number two, we hear this so often as well. We are using approved templates of our organization, so there is no issue. Well, the reality is very few, if any, templates that I've seen deal with AI risk at all, or even if they do so in a manner that actually pulls out the risk and manages it. Most are completely silent on the topic. So saying that I've used the approved templates will not necessarily get you around any issues. And believe me, if something goes dreadfully wrong, or even in any sort of partial way, it really is no defense to say, well, we used the template. Well, you know, was the template appropriate? And probably it was not. So misconception number three, the best approach for our organizations to say we will not use AI. Again, I have heard that, and it's quite a valid thing for an organization to say that we're not going to go out and buy AI or decide not to do it. Now, I think you just need to be aware of a couple of things. First of all of the state and territory governments, and I'll look at this in a minute, their approach is to embrace AI. It's not to not use it. And AI offers so many advantages and cost savings. So to say you won't use it really is largely inconsistent with the national approach. And in addition to that, whilst you may decide not to expressly buy it, you've got to remember that it may well be included in what is bid back. So just because you're saying you're not going to purchase it directly doesn't mean that it's not going to be bid back. So misconception number four, we're not currently using AI, so therefore we don't need to concern ourselves about it. Again, you need to stop thinking about AI as something quite separate. And yes, there are specific AI systems that you can purchase or use. You need to think of AI as something that's just permeating everything. And even in tender processes, you may think your tender process doesn't involve AI, but what I'm also finding is that many organizations will engage external consultants to advise on the process, like us, lawyers or probity advisors or procurement advisors. And what we're finding is they may well be using AI. So you as an organization may be using AI in a tender process without even really realizing it. Misconception number five, it has no insurance or risk implications. So this is something that's now expanding in conversation everywhere. And AI risk is being likened to sort of silent cyber. So what you're going to find is that, and we're having conversations now with brokers, is that you're going to be asked by your insurers, what AI are you using, and are you applying appropriate risk mitigations in relation to that? As brokers start to focus on whether or not AI is the cause of an insurable loss, and if it is, were appropriate measures taken to prevent that loss. So even if you think you don't need to worry about it, you may find that your insurance obligations require you to understand and appropriately manage all the AI that you're using, whether you're buying expressly or not. And misconception number six is that it has no security implications. Well, again, I don't know whether you've seen or recall, but very recently the Commonwealth Government and a number of the states banned the use of DeepSeek. And that was due to the security implications of that. And this may be the first of many bans, so we all need to be mindful of that. And just as an aside, I noticed an article recently about the UK Ministry of Defence, I think it was, banning electric vehicles being parked near defence premises because of potential spyware. Now, I don't know whether that was AI related or not, or which system what that was, but again, you have to be very mindful of what you're buying in and whether or not that may have security implications. And that was one classic example of that. And I was also recently presenting to a procurement body of the Strategic Advisory Committee of the National Procurement Advisory Council. One of the government procurement bodies. The name will come back to me in a moment. Anyway, I was asking them, have they come across DeepSeek? And this is one of the states, and they said yes, and they'd come across it in vehicles. So you have to be very mindful of what you're buying, even hiring, and what may be in it that you don't realise. So what are the risks and harms of AI? And this is partly, why we're here today. And the risks are well known, and this is just a tiny, tiny little sort of snapshot of some of the more common risks. And this will change over time as AI systems, I guess, improve and that whole risk paradigm moves and changes. The first one is bias. So AI systems are known to have inherent biases based upon whoever has put the data in and who's written it, including political, ethical, racial, gender or sexual preference biases, and they can result in discriminatory, unethical and non-inclusive practices. Data privacy, this is a very significant area, and we almost every day of the week we're hearing about private data being released. So AI systems use vast amounts of data that's central to the way they operate. And if private information is entered, potentially incorrectly, it then may be manipulated, transformed, or disclosed, contrary to the obligations of the organisation that obtained that private data. Data security, again, classified or secure information may also be manipulated or transformed. And again, DeepSeek is a classic area of exposure in relation to that. And intellectual property. This is again another area I think is going to expand in that intellectual property owned by third parties can, if it comes into an AI system, may then come back out again in a manner that is contrary to the license arrangements by the owners of that IP. In other words, it may be transformed or reproduced without the owner's consent and result in a breach. And just to emphasise the fact that all this is being taken very, very seriously, the Commonwealth Treasury is currently looking at whether or not Australian consumer law adequately protects consumers against AI use and protects them from its use. And they're trying to find out whether or not the law also supports the safe and responsible use of AI by businesses. And late last year, there was a report released by ASIC, Beware the Gap, which looked at how organisations are governing the use of AI and AI innovation. And it really found that there was a very, very patchy degree of compliance, often relying on third parties, and that there are multiple weaknesses in the way that organisations were managing the use of AI. So what I want to do now is just sort of give you a skim overview of the national response to AI, and then we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. I guess at the core of all of this are Australia's AI ethics principles, and these are designed to ensure the safe, secure and reliable use of AI. And then on the back of that is the National Framework for the Assurance of Artificial Intelligence in Government. So what's important to note is that this is a joint approach of the Australian and the state and territory governments. And it states expressly that they are committed to being exemplars in the safe and responsible use of AI. It's a very important and central document. In addition to that is the voluntary AI safety standard. And until recently, and there's a bit more guidance that's just come out, I'll talk about it in a minute, this provides really good procurement guidance to organisations on how to buy AI. Now, the standard itself is written for high-risk AI, and I'll go through this again in a minute, but as we're all aware, risk is not binary. It's not sort of high risk or no risk. It exists on a spectrum. So it's a really good document to look at, but you need to then work out where on the spectrum of risk your AI sits and which of the obligations in there you should adopt. There's the policy for responsible use of AI in government. So this is a document issued by the Commonwealth Government for various Commonwealth Government agencies. And it reiterates that there's an expectation of government being an exemplar of safe and responsible use of AI. And interestingly, it expressly states that government has an elevated level of responsibility for its use of AI and should be held to a higher standard of ethical behaviour. So again, these really are not things that we should be ignoring. The other document is, and it's a very long title here, I'm sorry, but basically it's a discussion paper for mandatory guardrails, which you should read as just basically legislation. So the Commonwealth is looking at legislation in relation to the use of AI, and this applies to developers and deployers. So I assume that not many of us out there are developing AI, but most of us will be deploying AI. So I haven't seen the bill in relation to this as yet, but I assume with the government returned that this will come into force soon, but I don't have any more information on that. Again, we'll look at that a bit more in a moment. Now, in addition to that, which is the national response, each of the states and territories, or many of the states and territories, have their own regimes, and broadly speaking, they all complement the national framework, and the national framework contemplates the establishment of regimes by the states and territories. Now, it's really beyond the scope of today to go through each of these and each individual state where they have them, particularly Queensland and New South Wales have got quite sophisticated regimes. That would be a presentation on its own, but just be mindful of that. If that's where you're based, you ought to be alert to that regime. So circling back to each of those elements. So I just wanted to go through, first of all, Australia's AI ethics principles. So it's a really good idea to have this at the back of your mind, but all of the policy documents that we'll look at as well have this as their foundation, but it's really good to just sort of keep in mind what these are all about. So the first one is human, societal, and environmental well-being. And what this is basically saying is AI should benefit individuals, society, and the environment. Human-centered values, principle number 2, that AI should respect human rights and diversity. Principle number 3 is fairness. AI should be inclusive, accessible, and non-discriminatory. Principle number 4, privacy, protection, and security. Really important that AI upholds and protects privacy rights, and protects data. Principle 5, the system should be reliable and safe, and it should reliably operate in accordance with its intended purpose. Principle 6, transparency and explainability. This is really important, that people should know when they're being significantly impacted by AI and when they're engaging with an AI system. Again, this emphasizes the importance of all members understanding what AI they are using and whether their customers or users are then engaging with an AI system as a result, because you need to tell people about that. Principle number 7, contestability. Again, very important for members. The public should be able to challenge the outcome of an AI system if it significantly impacts on them. But to be able to challenge it, you need to be able to know you're using it, inform people, and then set up a framework where they can contest it. So it's one of the fundamental principles of our ethics arrangement, is that if you are using AI and you're users, whoever they may be, are going to be using AI, you need to tell them, they need to be informed, and if it affects them in a fundamental way, it ought to be contestable. And generally speaking, that involves a human being able to review those decisions. And ethic principle number 8, those responsible for the different phases of an AI system should be identifiable and accountable for the outcomes of the AI system. Human oversight of AI systems should be enabled. Now, it's a bit hard to understand that in some ways, but basically what that says is you need to go down the entire supply chain. So those of you out there who've dealt with modern slavery provisions, it's a bit comparable to that. You've got to work out where it's happening within the supply chain and identify that and ensure that there is human oversight over that. So that's just a brief thumbnail sketch of our ethics principles. The next thing I just wanted to go through in brief detail, excuse me, is the national framework. So this is quite a large document. Excuse me, I lose my voice. For the it's a joint approach to the safe and responsible use of AI. Now, there's some key quotes in here I want to emphasise. The first of all, again, this is a statement by the Commonwealth and states and territories that we recognise that public confidence and trust is essential to governments embracing the opportunities and realising the full potential of AI. To gain public confidence and trust, we commit. I put that in red because it's really important to understand that this is a commitment to being exemplars in the safe and responsible use of AI, and this requires a lawful, ethical approach that places the rights and well-being and interests of people first. So what the framework then does is it's based on the AI ethics principles, which we've just talked about, and it establishes what it calls cornerstones and practices of AI assurance. And it also expressly states that the intention is that the states and territories will form their own specific policies and guidance. So just to go through some of those briefly, these are the cornerstones of assurance, and I've tried to summarize them here. And again, this will resonate with what we talked about a minute ago in relation to the ethics principles. So the first one is governance. So this is what organizations need to do in order to manage AI appropriately. So AI governance comprises the organizational structure, policies, processes, regulation roles and responsibilities and risk management frameworks that ensure the safe and responsible use of AI in a way that is fit for the future. So AI needs to be centered to what your organization is doing, and a governance arrangement needs to be established around that, or the use of AI needs to be swept up into your existing governance arrangements. Data governance. There's no doubt that the quality of an AI model's output is driven by the quality of its data. So this is again emphasizing that the quality of what AI is doing will be governed by the quality of that data, and any errors in there, any IP errors, third-party IP or private data going into there, that's going to govern the quality of what you do, what comes out, and any risks that the organization faces. The third point is one that is quite central to the way that Australia is managing AI, is taking a risk-based approach. And again, this is what I said earlier, in that risk is not binary, but that you need to determine what AI you're purchasing, what the risk is, and then structure your provisions and your governance arrangements based upon that risk. So as it says here, the use of AI should be assessed and managed on a case-by-case basis. That is correct. This ensures safe and responsible development, procurement, and deployment in high-risk settings with minimal administrative burden in low-risk settings. So what they're doing is they're establishing that range. So whilst it says high and low, as I said, it's not a binary structure. You've got to work out where on that spectrum you sit, and then put in place a risk management paradigm that manages that risk appropriately based upon the risk. Standards. Where practical, governments should align their approaches to relevant AI standards. So as I mentioned before, the government has released the voluntary AI safety standard, and what it's saying is there that you should align your approach to AI based upon that standard. I think that's the only one I'm aware of so far, but it's a good basis to start. Now, pardon me, The last cornerstone is the one I'm wanting to focus on a bit more, and this is in relation to procurement. So for those out there who do procurement on a daily basis, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but it actually provides quite detailed guidance on what we need to be doing with our procurement processes when AI is involved. And as I said to you before, that's basically every procurement process, unless you're absolutely certain that you're not going to be given AI won't be bid back. So careful consideration must. Now, I emphasize the word must because it's rare that that word is used in these sorts of documents, but this is what each of the jurisdictions has stated, that it must be applied to procurement documentation and contractual agreements when procuring AI systems or products, and that this may require consideration of AI ethics principles, clearly established accountabilities, transparency of data, access to relevant information assets, and proof of performance testing through an AI system lifecycle. So what they're saying here is that you really have to overlay into your procurement documentation and your contracts consideration of all of those aspects of AI. So you've got to bring AI into your procurement processes. And it goes on. It is essential to remain mindful of the rapid pace of AI advancements and ensure contracts are adaptable to changes in technology. So what that translates to basically is that when you go out to market and you've got a template contract in there, that it has appropriate provisions in there that deal with AI risk management and how AI may change over the term of the contract. But it also then, implicit in that as well, is you've got undoubtedly current contracts in place where your contractors may also be using AI that you're not aware of, and you need to actually understand that. And one of the things I'm doing for various organizations is writing to current contractors to ask them what AI are they using, and looking at putting in place provisions to then have a degree of oversight over what is being used and how that's being managed. And obviously that risk paradigm will change over time. Government should also consider internal skills development and knowledge transfer between vendors and staff to ensure sufficient understanding of a system's operation and outputs, to avoid vendor lock-in and ensure vendors and staff fulfill their responsibilities. So there's a big training element to this, and I don't underestimate the scale of all of that, but we actually need to understand what is being used by our contractors and make sure that our internal staff are aware of it and able to manage that. Due diligence in procurement plays a critical role in managing new risks, such as transparency and explainability of black box AI systems like foundation models. So what they're saying when they say due diligence, what we're talking about there is evaluations. So when you go out to market for something, it's really important that you ask the relevant questions in relation to what AI may be fed back and what may be buried in black box systems. So as many of you who do procurement would understand, it's very hard to ask a question after you've released the document. So this needs to be built into your templates now. You need to be asking these questions and working out what AI is being bid back and how those risks are going to be managed. And it goes on. AI can also amplify existing risks such as privacy and security. Governments must evaluate whether existing standard contractual clauses adequately cover these new and amplified risks. And that's actually really well put, because what AI does is that they're not necessarily new risks, but it does amplify those risks. And unless you're actually understanding what you've got, it's very hard to manage them. But also, as I said here, you need to understand whether the existing contractual provisions cover those amplified risks. And in many instances, I would say that they do not. Consideration should be made to a vendor's capability to support the review, ongoing monitoring, or evaluation of the system's outputs in the event of an incident or stakeholder raising concerns. This should include providing evidence and support for review mechanisms. So what this is saying is that over the life of a contract, you really do need to be able to provide stakeholder, i.e. your own organisation's internal feedback, so that if you're not comfortable with what's being done or there are problems happening, you've got the contractual rights to actually manage that over the term of the contract. Again, this needs to be built into your current contracts and built into your templates of what you're going out to market with. going on, governments may face trade-offs between procured components benefits and inherent assurance challenges, and the resolutions will vary to use, according to use, and tolerance threshold. So again, AI offers extraordinary benefits and extraordinary cost savings, but it's up to us as evaluators to evaluate those and make informed decisions as to whether or not the trade-offs that inherently imposes are worth it. Ultimately, procurement should prioritise alignment with ethics principles alongside delivering on a government's desired outcomes. So again, it's putting back to the centre of a procurement process the ethics principles. And what I would say to you is really your evaluation criteria should actually capture that. And you should be asking at your core how, if there any AI is being bid back, how do you ensure that I, as a member, will satisfy Australia's ethics principles when using your system, including AI? So I know that was pretty heavy sort of stuff, but what we'll go through now is kind of what the government has produced, which gives you some significant assistance in how to do all that. So first of all is the voluntary AI safety standard. So this is designed to assist with the safe, responsible use of AI in high-risk settings, as I mentioned before, and it focuses on safety, ethics, and accountability at each stage of the procurement process. I really recommend that you all have a look at this. It's just a free document that you can download off the DISAR website. I'm happy to send links, but it's actually very detailed and quite a good explanatory document. But as I'll mention in a minute, there's a few more documents that are probably even more helpful. So the voluntary AI safety standard applies to developers. So these are organisations that are actually creating and testing AI, and I'm assuming there's not too many of those listening today, but also deployers, which is the majority of us. So this is when you're using it to provide services, or you're using it internally, might be for your HR system or some other internal system. So it's designed to apply to both. It's a bit omnibus in that regard, but it's quite detailed and very useful. As mentioned before, it applies in high-risk settings. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you a really good understanding of what high risk is, but the government has in the mandatory guardrails document, a separate document, but related, given an example of what it's sort of looking at as being high risk. And it comes as no surprise that high risk is considered to be when AI is used in medical, critical infrastructure, that's telecommunication, electricity, gas, etc., education, employment, law enforcement, border protection, and the administration of justice. So classic examples of high risk. So it's designed for those circumstances, but as I keep saying, if you are, as you can see from the graphic, sort of medium or low, you still have to think about how those risks are to be managed, and whether some lesser form of what's in the high risk applies. But the thing I'd also say, as someone who's done procurement for 20 years, when you do go out to market, you don't know what's being bid back. So you probably need to have in there whatever is the requirements for a high risk setting, because until you know what it is, you won't know. So it's much easier to pull something back than to increase the requirements. And as mentioned, the safety standard includes detailed procurement guidance, and it's a good template of what to do. So just at a very sort of brief scan, I'll go through this in a bit more detail in a moment. It sets out what you should be asking for from your tenderers in relation to the AI that they may be bidding back, the system's design, capabilities, limitations, how potential risks and associated deployment of AI will be managed. It talks about what you do in your evaluations, and it's actually asking them how will they manage potential risks such as data privacy, security biases, and compliance with the Australian AI ethics principles. Also ask how the AI model will be trained and tested. And then for your contract, it talks about putting in mechanisms that look at how you'll manage the ongoing monitoring of accountability for the AI system after deployment. So one of the key issues is who does that? Is it the contractor, or is it you, or is it a mixture of both? And as I mentioned before, a key component of that is to be able to provide feedback to your contractors if you're not comfortable with the way things are occurring, and how, if you've got third parties engaging with the system, what's the mechanism for review of decisions, etc. So the next document I want to talk about is the mandatory guardrails. And as I mentioned, this is the proposal for basically legislation in relation to this. So I'm assuming this is on its way. So again, like it or not, I think more likely than not, we're going to have legislation, and that will, the way the document is drafted just refers to organisations. It doesn't seem to have any more definition than that. So my assumption is that it will apply to all of those listening today, but I don't know. And how it will be drafted, I'm not sure, but it does expressly say that if you align your processes with the voluntary AI safety standard, you'll be basically broadly aligned with what's going to come under the mandatory guardrails. So very important, again, document to align with. The next document, and I know this is a lot to go through, is the policy of responsible use of AI in government. Now, the reason I included this is a document specifically targeted to various Commonwealth government departments and agencies, but it's a really excellent document as far as what they need to do to set up their governance regime. So it's a good document to look at as how you set up that regime. But also just important to note that it emphasises that, as it says there, that the government is an exemplar in safe and responsible use of AI in line with the Australian community's expectations. So it's really important to be mindful of what the expectation on government is. As I've got there, it has an elevated level of responsibility for its use of AI and should be held to a higher standard. So really important to be mindful of that, particularly for any Commonwealth statutory organisations. So what it does is also state a requirement to comply with the policy. It puts together measures to monitor the effectiveness of deployed AI systems and efforts to protect the public against negative impacts. So it sets all that regime out. In addition, it includes a risk matrix. Now, whilst this is pretty bog standard risk matrix, it does go to emphasise the point I was making before, that your risks exist on that spectrum, and you've got to work out where in that matrix you sit in relation to the AI that you may be purchasing. And again, the way the Australian government is operating is that the provisions you put in place to manage AI should be commensurate with the risk, which makes complete sense. The global response. So just so you don't think you're on your own here, there's a lot that's happening internationally. So I've just got, I mentioned a few bits and pieces there. European Union has approved the EU AI Act. And I recently just looked at a couple of the documents on their website. They've got some really good, useful documents, which one of them most recently is a guidance in relation to how you assess whether AI has contributed to a risk. So sort of contributory factors there, actually really well put together. The UK government's looking at a principles-based approach to AI, so there's quite a lot of work happening there. The US AI Safety Institute is looking at developing guidelines on evaluations of risk medications. And Denmark's done quite a bit of work in relation to generative AI. So there's a lot going on internationally, but really most of the world is chasing its tail on managing this, but a lot of work is nevertheless happening. So there are good international resources to look at as well as the domestic ones. So how do we respond? Look, there's a lot that needs to be done. And broadly speaking, as I said before, you really need to be assuming that your procurements may include AI, and I would actually just say that they will include AI. And if that is the case, then it needs to be built in right at the template stage. So those template documents need to be updated to manage that risk. And then you need to check internally if you're using AI. As I mentioned, I'm not sure whether your own external advisors and evaluators are using it. And one thing I find very interesting is that many organisations quite rightly undertake conflict of interest checks in relation to their external advisors, but they don't ask if they're using AI, which is equally significant. So again, just because you're not specifically buying in an AI system doesn't mean that you're not necessarily using it in one form or another. And the third element is to check if your current contractors are using AI. And this really is a process of, if you're not aware, of writing to those who may well be using it or may well soon be using it. And if they are, then it may be necessary to amend those contracts so you're alert to that, or to say that they shouldn't without your prior consent, and then manage what they are using. So what I've tried to do here is just to give you a little bit more meat on the bones of what we need to do. So for those involved in procurement processes, you need to build this into your procurement plan and your industry engagement plan. So from a procurement plan perspective, you need to think about what's the likelihood a tenderer may bid back AI as part of the solution, how those risks will be managed if there's the successful tenderers, and how AI will be managed across the term of the contract. If you're engaging in, if there's an industry engagement plan, if you're actually going out talking to the market, again, it's really useful to sort of set out what you're going to say about AI. Is it something that you're going to tell industry don't use it, or we don't want it, or as I mentioned before, the government's position is to embrace AI. But think about whether or not, as part of your industry engagement, you should be informing them of what they need to do if they're going to bid back AI. Probity. I haven't mentioned this to a great extent, and half of my life is spent advising on probity, but this has significant probity implications. As I mentioned before, if one of your evaluators or expert advisors is using AI, you need to then be aware of that, and its potential that needs to be mentioned in the conditions of tender if AI is going to be used as part of the tender process. And again, as I said before, if a tender is adversely affected by that, there may well need to be rights of review. But again, you don't know what you don't know, so you need to be starting to ask those questions and potentially building that into your probity plan. So respondent information requirements. So this is where we need to put in a lot of detailed requirements into our requests for tender as to the information to come back from our respondents. So what's their risk management process for any AI? How are they going to manage the risks? How are they going to identify the risks and potential harms? What are their data management processes, including data quality, data provenance, private security, and cybersecurity practices? Is any banned AI being used? And again, look, maybe the third point there is not relevant for just general procurements, but these are the sorts of things you need to build in case it is. So you can at least take that out or ask the question, and if it's a nil response, that's fine. Continuing on, there needs to be thought given and to what the allocation of responsibility between the contractor and the member is for monitoring and evaluating the AI model. Again, maybe there's not going to be one, but maybe there is, and the consideration needs to be given, and maybe it's something that's bid back as to who manages what in relation to that. Governance and oversight, again, what's the contractor's governance regime for managing when something goes wrong, when human oversight is required, or when a review is required. Public transparency, how will either you or the contractor inform the public, if that's relevant, that AI is being used, and what dispute resolution mechanisms are available. Excuse me. Again, this is my voice. Roles and responsibilities across the AI supply chain. As mentioned before, it's a bit like modern slavery. You've got to go down the whole supply chain. If a subcontractor is using it, it doesn't excuse you as an organisation from managing that risk, and you need to know about that. So again, these are the sorts of information requests you may need to make. And also AI-related documentation and retention record undertakings, stakeholder impact assessments. How is this going to be managed by the contractor? So you as an organisation, you may have a board, or your internal stakeholders' needs may move and change over time. How will your successful tenderer manage those concerns? How will they be addressed? Again, in your conditions of tender, as I mentioned before, I really suggest that you elevate this right up to your evaluation criteria. As those involved in procurement would know, there's little point asking detailed questions unless you can bring that into consideration as part of your evaluations. So you need to have something within your evaluation criteria which allows you to do that. And I've just got here, there's a very simple, basic sort of criteria, which would be how the respondent will ensure that the member is an exemplar of safe and responsible use of AI and compliant with the AI ethics principles. So it's really important that it actually is in your criteria, and that then tells the market, the level of importance this is to you as an organisation when considering a response. Draft contract clauses. So I've gone through here just at a high level what you need to have in there. And I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a moment. But what I would say, and I can also send a link, I found out only this morning that the Digital Transformation Agency's just released a whole raft of draft contract clauses for AI, including embedded AI. So from the contract perspective, our life has become a little bit easier. I haven't had a chance to look at it in any particular detail. I don't think in there is anything that's conditions of tender related. It would help if it were, but there are now government-based draft clauses, which are a really good starting point. Obviously, it would all need to be tailored to your own individual organisation's contracts, and you need to pitch it based upon the risk. But there are drafts out there which really does help. But here's and this is my own sort of broad categorisation of what we need to put in there. Number one, the process for identifying potential AI risks, harms. Number two, the data management process, including data quality, governance, privacy, security, and cybersecurity. That's really for an AI model that's in there. The governance and oversight regime, the allocation of responsibility from monitoring and evaluating the AI model, if that's what's in there. Very important for essentially all is the process for human intervention if required. How do people know about it being used, and what's sort of the appeal process? Reporting obligations to inform end users of AI system use. Who's going to do that? Is it the member or is it the contractor? And what's the process for the contestability of AI decisions by those affected? Roles and responsibility across the information, and roles and information flow across the AI supply chain. It's talking about how far down the supply chain you go and how you find that out. You need to impose an obligation on the contractor to provide that information back up to you. And then potentially impact assessments and how the contractor will remove ethical biases and ethical prejudices. So if you find that your users, your customers are being negatively impacted, you want to be able to feed that back to your contractor and ask them to make the relevant changes. And again, from a contract management perspective, you're really going to need to work with your contractor to understand any concerns and how that they will adopt your concerns or address your concerns, and how any unwanted biases and ethical prejudice, heaven forbid, are going to be identified and removed. So I put in here some time ago some drafting around what I would suggest is at a very, very high level you need to put into various documents. So this is in your risk management plan. This would probably be in your conditions of tender or your tender deliverable requirements. But again, this is probably going to be overtaken by what DTA has provided. So I'll provide a copy of the slides at the end of all this, but I'm not sure how relevant it is to you. I wouldn't sort of slavishly copy all this, but these are the sorts of things you need to be looking at. In your current contracts, contractor mustn't use AI or allow subcontractors to use AI without your prior approval. and that could include terms and conditions regarding use or deployment of AI, and that'd be just the minimum requirement you have for your current contracts. Notification of approval of use of AI, asking contractors to notify you prior to using it in the performance of any aspect of the contract. And you'd ask them for notification of scope, purpose, expected outcomes on the AI system, interaction with other data systems, and the role in any decision making. So there's a lot you need to put in there. But again, I'd look at this just briefly, and I'd refer now to the DTA's clauses, which are far more detailed. I was just trying to put this as an example. So I guess some of the key takeaways in relation to all this is that AI is permeating almost everything. It's not something separate. It's not something different. It's not something you necessarily expressly procure. It's just there. And it's fundamentally changing the risk paradigm of what we're doing. So it's a risk that needs to be managed now, and barreling towards you is going to be an obligation probably under insurance provisions and under legislation to identify and manage that appropriately.